Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. I got the easy job. Once a week, I interview a green building professional somewhere in the world. And today I've got a LEED Fellow here. I've got Rob Winstead with us. He's in Virginia. He's a principal there at his firm and also the K12 studio leader. We got to hang out a little bit at Green Build a few months ago and just excited to hear his green building journey. Rob, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this podcast.
Oh, man, it's been great. Well, our goal is to just be encouraging. We try not to get too technical on LEED item this or that and just let's tell some stories. And today's about your story. So if you would, take us back. Rob, where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Well, I don't know how far back we want to go, but I'm a military kid. So I'm from everywhere and nowhere. But I do think that my military experience had a pretty profound effect on me. Moved all over the United States and all over the world as a kid. I think one of the reasons I'm an architect is because our family lived in Europe for 3.5 years when I was 7 to 11. And I got to travel and see all the great cities of Europe. And my parents were great about packing up the VW Dasher with picnics and taking us to Paris or Rome or Vienna on the weekends. And I think that really shaped me in a lot of ways. But I think it also opened my eyes to the fact that the world is a much bigger place and that we're all connected.
Early influence, I could imagine. I've only in the last 7 years really started stamping my passport. So I love that. Just seeing that architecture, those buildings, different cultures, different languages, worldly at a young age. That definitely had influence on you. So did you kind of know, though, hey, you might want to go study and become an architect? Was that the sure thing?
Well, growing up as a military kid, I thought for a long time I wanted to go that path. It was a good life for our family in many ways. And my dad was career Air Force. And so I actually applied to military academies and about half military academies and half architecture programs, and ended up declining the Air Force Academy on the last possible day and going to UVA on an Air Force ROTC scholarship to study architecture. And that really started in high school. I, like a lot of gray hairs my age, I took a mechanical drafting class in high school and fell in love with that. I was always designing houses for my mom in childhood, and so knew that was an interest. My family knew nothing about that. I come from a family of military folks and educators. So it was a strange path for my family, but one that I was interested in and passionate about. So I ended up at UVA for undergraduate architecture program.
Amazing. Continued that path. And then after that, after the undergrad, right, practiced a little bit and then went to Harvard for your master's in architecture. So tell us the early architecture jobs. And then, what made you want to go back to the master's?
Yeah, well, my first architecture job was actually in high school. I worked the print room at the Fairfax County Public Schools Design and Construction Office. My mom worked there and in Fairfax County as a teacher and got me a job working there. So very early exposure to school design and construction, age 16, smelling ammonia and running prints back in the print room. But then when I graduated from UVA, I went and worked for a couple of years. It was recession time, so it was a tough time to get a job as a young architect, but I ultimately did and really worked in kind of corporate interiors in downtown Washington, D.C. And while I was having a lot of fun and getting married at that time and all of that, I knew pretty clearly that was not the path that I wanted to follow. So I went to grad school to kind of reorient my career more towards base building and larger scale architecture, but also towards sustainability.
So that's when you went back there and then, sustainability, that's my follow-up. Did it happen to become an aha, like I'm going to really spend the rest of my career with some sustainability flavor or did that come later? How'd you really know, hey, it's going to be green buildings from here on out?
Yeah, I would say it came early for me, I grew up playing in the woods of Northern Virginia and had a lot of space to roam around our house. I had a 5-mile radius around a lake and spent a lot of time roaming the woods and building things and being connected to nature there. So I think that's really where my love of nature came from. I was an Eagle Scout, had a lot of mountaintop moments outdoors and explored the outdoor world through that. But then really in 1990, I took a course at UVA called Environmental Choices. And to my knowledge, it was one of the very first university courses taught on sustainable design. And it was really more about design and ethics more than anything. And it was, asking questions like, what does it mean to make a mark upon the land? And can architecture, really atone for the materials, resources, and energy that go into it? And should we be thinking about, penguins and polar bears and things like that as we're designing buildings in Virginia? And that was a really powerful experience for me. So that was during undergrad, third year of undergrad. And at that point, I saw for me that this love of the natural environment that I had and this connection that I had to it and this passion for design, I felt like maybe those things could come together. And, I'm not sure, I'm reflecting on it now, but I'm not sure I was that aware of it then. But then that kind of set me on the path towards going to Harvard and studying the courses that I did. I was sort of a green freak at Harvard. At the time I was there, it was all run by kind of European urbanists that wore all black and had, lots of product in their hair. And they didn't know what to do with me. I had long hair and a beard, and I was always taking, landscape architecture studios and classes in sustainability and landscape ecology. And, I had a hard time even finding a thesis advisor that wanted to do my thesis. But I stayed, the course, and I think I got a really broad education there. And when I graduated from Harvard, I started working downtown in Boston for Payette. And it was pretty clear to me I really needed to find a leader and a mentor around sustainable design. And so my wife and I moved back to Charlottesville to work so that I could work for Bill McDonough. He had just started as the dean at UVA and had opened an office here in Charlottesville, or moved his office from New York to Charlottesville. And I thought that would be an enormous opportunity for me to take all of these things that I had been studying and applying in my own work through my thesis and really start to make an impact in the world and hopefully find some mentors and guides to help shape my career.
Love that. Wow. Well, that's a good segue to mentors. So did anyone open a door for you along the way, or maybe someone you looked up to but maybe didn't have access to? Who would you call a mentor?
Well, definitely some of my professors at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. They really helped shape the way that I think and approach the world and approach problems. Richard Foreman, who taught landscape ecology there, was very memorable in my experience there at the GSD. And then also Carl Steinitz, who was a landscape and geospatial designer, really helped me think about at a much larger scale than the building and think about the impacts of good planning decisions and how buildings fit into larger systems and networks, really a systems thinking kind of education. So those are two very early mentors. I would also say that VMDO, where I work now, the first time that I worked here, beginning in 1998, I was, again, kind of the green freak and was, they nicknamed me Eco Rob. And, I got razzed a lot for talking so much about sustainability and beating that drum. But to their credit, VMDO, the owners and leaders here, really, supported me in many ways and helped me become the first director of sustainability here at VMDO and really opened that door. I wouldn't say that there was necessarily anybody kind of out in front leading the way for me, but they certainly didn't stand in my way and said, yeah, if you're passionate about this, follow your passion. And I think for young, ambitious designers, that's what people are looking for, is just an opportunity to pursue their passions.
Oh man, so good to give those shout outs to our mentors. So let's connect the dots on the timeline there. I mean, in a minute, we're going to talk about what you're doing present day, but anything as you look back, any kind of building types you just loved working on and designing over the years, or another kind of stair step in your career before you got to where you are today?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would say that I've had some really incredible opportunities in my career, incredible opportunities given to me by employers, but also clients. But I would say some of the most, right now I'm all about schools, and that's been a long-term ongoing thing. Like I said, I come from a family of educator, grandparents, mother, sister, cousins, aunts, all educators, and, feel very passionately that, education is the solution to a lot of the most challenging problems that we have in our society. And, designing schools is a way that I can contribute. So schools are important, and that's been a long time passion for me. But some of the most exciting projects are the ones that are kind of on the fringe of my career. And two that pop to mind are actually rather small. One is called Canal Basin Square. It's in Scottsville, Virginia. And it's really a landscape project. The architecture that is there is really more of a landscape proposition. And it's right along the banks of the James River and tells the story of the historic bateau boats, the packet boats that would ship goods up and down the James River. But it's really more about how architecture can support a larger landscape idea and tell the story of a place. And I think that was a very powerful, tiny project, but very powerful experience for me. And then the second one is the Monument to Free Expression, which is here on the downtown mall. That was a competition project, really started outside of my professional work. A landscape architect friend, Pete O'Shea, and I designed that together. And it was a very controversial project at the time that it was designed. It took 8 years to get it built. But it's right here on Charlottesville's downtown mall. It's a long slate chalkboard and a podium, sort of like a Hyde Park, type podium, but it's intended to encourage free speech. And so for years now, it's become the kind of start and end point for protests and community events. People are constantly writing messages on that board in chalk and speaking publicly in that space. It's right in front of City Hall. So it has a kind of direct relationship to the seat of government here in our community. And it's sort of a timeline. It's of events that are going on in our world. And so every time there's a major event, like the current, Israeli-Palestinian war, for instance, the wall is covered with messages for that. Now, and then it becomes this kind of open public discussion. So for me, that kind of, even though it's very small, probably the smallest project I've done by budget and scale, it's a very important one in our community, and I think a wonderful example of how architecture can really become a social infrastructure that supports a dialogue in a community.
Yeah, I mean, obviously an entire ESG umbrella that's now kind of just encompassed the green building movement, if you will. And that's a perfect example of the social, the community, and that's a very significant project. I love what you said earlier, too. Tiny but powerful. One more look back. Anything else on the highlight reel or some accomplishments you're proud of? Life, business?
Wow. Yeah. I wouldn't be a good dad if I didn't say my kids.
Love it. How old are they? What are they up to?
Well, my son is 23 and my daughter is 25. My son's getting ready to graduate from JMU in the spring. And my daughter works for the Greater Boston Food Bank up in Boston. They're both in love all of a sudden, which is a very exciting time. I have relationships going on, but most importantly, they're just really wonderful people. And maybe the best thing for me is they still want to hang out with us. So feels like, a great success to me that my kids are growing up and becoming independent and good people with good hearts, but they still want to hang out with their dad and mom from time to time. That's a huge success. But, I think for me, the biggest highlight really of my career, or what I hope, the legacy will be, is that, I was able, through having great clients and great opportunities, I was lucky to be in a position where I could kind of take on a lot of firsts in my career and take on projects that became examples of what was possible for others. So, and then hopefully, shared openly what I was learning and, helped support kind of industry evolution, throughout my career, both through projects and through public presentations and publications and things like that.
Our motto here on the podcast, I don't talk about it enough, is teach everything you know. And I actually have some t-shirts. So next time I see you, I'll try to remember to podcast t-shirt says teach everything you know. And that's what I'm hearing from you here. LEED fellow. I mean, you've had other LEED credentials, architecture licenses. You've probably been a part of several trade organizations, but LEED fellow, I mean, is that just validating, hey, I've done a lot of cool green building work? And what's the LEED fellow mean to you?
Yeah, it certainly is validating. I don't think there are that many professional credentials or recognitions that would matter a whole lot to me. The impact of the projects and the influence in communities and things like that of the work, I think is the reward, really. But LEED fellow is definitely one of them. If I had to list, professional recognitions that would matter to me, LEED fellow is one, in part because I'm old enough that, I feel like I was kind of there at the beginning. And then also, and I've seen the kind of evolution of LEED and the development of LEED and the industry transformation that's happened because of LEED, but also because I feel like I've beat that drum really loud, shouted into the wind, pushed the rock up the hill, whatever you want to say. I feel like I did a lot of hard work to try and champion LEED and support its development. And so it is a recognition or a validation that work mattered and made a contribution to the industry at large.
It does, and you did. And that's the why I called the podcast the Green Building Matters podcast. It does matter. So let's talk present day. Tell us more about your role, a day in the life of. But first, tell us more about your firm.
So I'd call it a regional firm. We're one firm with two offices. We have an office, our headquarters in Charlottesville, Virginia. And then about 5 years ago, we opened an office in Washington, D.C. We have about 80 total staff, 11 full-time staff in D.C. and the rest here in Charlottesville. And we really focus on public work. We have 3 practice areas right now. I lead the K12 practice area. There's also athletics and community and higher education. And if you know about higher education, that's very broad. Everything from science labs to student centers and residence halls. So there's a lot of typologies in there. And then athletics and community is also a real blend. Everything from major athletic venues to community centers, YMCAs, libraries, those sorts of projects, but really all public projects. And I think for me, that's the type of work that I want to do. A lot of architecture is about making rich people more comfortable. But I think that the public work that we do really matters, and it has a larger, broader influence on the public at large and on communities as a whole.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about schools. I know in your profile it says you've become an expert at zero energy schools. So, Rob, educate us. What's it take to maybe get to a zero energy school? Is the public sector doing that yet, or is it a little more funding on the private side? So, kind of where are we at in that journey, and how do we do more of that?
Well, this is the good news that I hope people will believe. I think net zero energy schools are believable, achievable, and necessary, and they can be done without added cost. And nobody believes us when we say that, but it's true, especially today. A lot of things have changed. Technology's come a long way in support of these goals, but the work that VMDO does is actually proving it out. The strategies for first of all, I would say the first thing that it takes is a community that is willing to even consider it, that doesn't say no right off the bat because they think it's going to cost more or whatever. And I would say Discovery Elementary School, which is a very famous project, well known, that VMDO did. It was the first net zero energy school in the Mid-Atlantic, first LEED Zero school. That project started because the client didn't say no, because they said, yeah, you can try, but you're not going to get it one more dollar. It has to come in under the budget. And it did. It bid under the budget, and we actually returned money, almost $1 million to the district at the end of the project. That's with the photovoltaic panels included in the project. So that's an example of, it is possible. what exists is possible. And so we achieved that there, and that project led to the next round of zero energy projects for that client. And then it jumped from schools to other types of public buildings like Parks and Rec Center. And now it's really changed, that community's entire, and changed their expectations about what their public buildings should be. They expect their public buildings to be zero energy buildings at this point. And then they in turn have become a shining light and example for other communities that are willing to pursue that. And so that spread not only within the region, but nationally as well, to encourage other communities to try what they've done. So, these are tried and true strategies, and it's off the shelf technology. This is nothing, this is not rocket science. And it's things that we as architects and designers have known for a long time. We start with the basics: building orientation, siting, massing. We look very closely at apertures, the windows and door openings, protect that glass. We orient it properly to get glare-free daylight inside the building. We pay very careful attention to the building envelope. Air sealing is really critical to achieving these things. So, it's sort of like we're building a Yeti cooler, right? Instead of the styrofoam cooler you get at the 7-Eleven for your beer, right? It's a very well insulated, well sealed building. And so it takes very little energy, very small mechanical systems. So we downsize or right size the mechanical systems. We use smart but simple controls, all LED lighting. By the time you get there, the renewable energy system required to offset that energy load is relatively small and relatively affordable. And if you want to buy it yourself, you can. There are also power purchase agreements and other ways to purchase those systems.
We got to believe we can do it. You're doing it. We got to believe we have the ingredients, but Rob just gave us literally the recipe in 2 minutes. I mean, you walked through it and made it seem simple, and it is right in front of us. So, man, thank you for demystifying zero net energy schools. I mean, you literally just gave us the recipe. So anybody that, has questions about doing that work, make sure you reach out to Rob on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll collaborate with you.
Sorry, let me give you one more resource plug. So VMDO was actually part of the author group for this document, but ASHRAE has a advanced energy design guide for net zero energy K12 schools. And it is organized by climate zone. So no matter where you are, find your climate zone, follow the prescriptive path that's in there, and you're going to get darn close to zero energy. So, if you need a recipe book, that's the cookbook. You can download it on the ASHRAE or the DOE website. It's broadly available, but certainly, reach out if you have any questions or concerns.
Perfect resource. I'll put a link to that too in our podcast show notes. That is the cookbook. All right, let's talk about the future. So, what are you excited about? What are you reading up on? What's kind of coming at us in this green building movement?
Well, certainly, how do we deal with existing building stock? That's a huge challenge we have. So embodied carbon, obviously, we're all talking about that, whether we're doing new buildings or renovations or whatever, but we're really trying to get our arms around that and build the tools and resources that we all need to better understand and evaluate, the energy and the impact of, the materials that we're using to build these buildings. But then, I think over time, we have to address the existing building stock and do these high performance renovations of existing buildings to achieve these same goals. We're not going to build our way out of this problem. And VMDO is currently wrestling with this. We've got a number of net zero energy or net zero energy ready school buildings that are significant percentage of them are renovation. Currently, we're working on a school in Washington, D.C. About 35% of the building is going to be a historic building. And so we are wrestling with this problem now and feel like if we can succeed in doing that, that's going to open all kinds of doors for these public buildings in all of our communities. So that's huge. I think that's a really big opportunity. I think the IRA is an incredible funding tool that we have, but also an incredible challenge. So this is an Inflation Reduction Act. Currently, you can get 30 to 50% of the cost of your entire geothermal system, including everything that's attached to it. So this is a major potential savings for our clients. But it comes in the form of, and you can also get 30 to 50% off of a PV system through the IRA. But it's in the form of a tax credit. And most of our public clients don't pay taxes. They don't have people on their staff that do taxes. They really don't know how to approach this problem. And so we're working with our clients and with our partners to really help our clients understand how they can take advantage of this tax credit. But then there's also the funding or the financing gap where, because it's a tax credit, the clients will have to pay for it up front and then wait a year or more to get the money back. So is there a bridge loan in there? Who's providing that? Do we have green banks that can fill that gap? Those sorts of things. So it seems like it's a tremendous opportunity to, advance these sustainable systems and make them more widespread in their use without adding additional cost. It's just a challenge of how do we leverage that. So that's a big one. And then, I think for me, the thing you talked about, the kind of social side of sustainability, we end up talking a lot about kilowatts and kBTUs and things that we can count, right? But, particularly in schools, for example, we know there's been a ton of learning loss due to the COVID crisis. We know that we have a mental health crisis going on with youth and adolescents right now. And I think for me, those are much more fuzzy and challenging problems. But if you think about social capital and the potential of these generations that are being educated right now and the challenges that they're facing or will need to face in the near future, I think that is an enormous opportunity that we have and something that we have to take much more seriously in this country.
Wow, you nailed it. Existing buildings, the need for green financing, and then let's not forget about the social side, our team, our employees, the culture we have at our companies, and obviously the communities we serve. So I agree with all of that. That was awesome. Let's go through some rapid fire questions here to get to know you more, Rob. What would you say is your specialty or gift?
Wow. I think, I don't know if I'm answering for me or for my colleagues, but I think a lot of times I say we can or will do something before I know how to do it. And you can call it, I don't know what you want to call that, courage, stupidity, foolishness, I don't know. But, if something needs to be done, I'm willing to say, like, we're going to figure that out. We're going to do that.
I would call that courage. Two things. If you honestly can confidently answer, who better to do that than us, and you're not BSing too much, then right. You're going to figure that out, right? That's confidence, that's courage. But I don't know if you've ever heard ready, fire, aim. Ready, aim, fire. Ready, fire, aim. So there you
right.
go. So you have any good habits or routines that help keep you on point?
Yeah. So, friendships, exercise, all important. I practice yoga. That helps a lot with stress management and also just getting old. Keeps me a little more nimble. But probably the one that I would advocate for here on your podcast is I'm a voracious reader. And I think that you've heard the adages, you got to read to lead. But I think it really has to do with lifelong learning for me. So I'm constantly having discussions about what people are reading. It's one of the common questions I ask when I'm meeting somebody. But it's also a way for me to stay current and really try and wrestle with these big ideas and big challenges that we're having. My family would all say, Dad, stop reading such depressing books, because I'm always, reading about social challenges and things like that. They're just like, would you just read a story once in a while? But I do read all the time. I've always got 2 or 3 books going at once.
Very cool. And I love you said friendships there too. That's amazing. So let's talk about books. That's a good segue. I love to ask my podcast guests, Rob, is there a book you'd recommend? It definitely doesn't have to be about building. So it sounds like you probably have several, but what are a couple of books you'd recommend?
Wow. Let me see. What are some that I've read recently? COVID was an amazing time. I went on a journey into racism in the United States, how to be an anti-racist, books like that. And that was a pretty powerful experience. the book that I would highly recommend and feel like should be required reading for every high school student in the United States is a book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and really blew my mind and changed the way that I think about race issues. There's actually a movie for those who don't want to read the book. There's a movie out called Origin right now. It just premiered at the Virginia Film Festival in Charlottesville. But it is about Isabel Wilkerson's life during the time that she was writing that book. So you get a nice intro to a lot of the ideas and what was going on at that time. It's a pretty hefty book, but I highly recommend that everybody take a look at that.
Well, I'll put links to these books in the show notes, as well as the design guide we mentioned earlier. Thanks for the recommendations. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Not everybody has a bucket list. That's okay. But if you were to have a bucket list, Rob, what are one or two things on the bucket list? Any adventure, travel? Do you want to write another book? What's in there?
Wow, bucket list. Well, I mean, I'm not so far away from thinking about retirement, and got enough gray hair for that. But I've told my wife that, two things that I'd like to do is to, go back to taking university classes and kind of continue learning and growing. So that's something I'm excited about. But I'm also really excited about taking long walks in beautiful places. So by long walks, 30 days to 60, 90-day walks, whether it's Appalachian Trail or, Camino, Inca Trail. There's West Highland Way in Scotland. So all kinds of, wonderful places to walk and explore and kind of move at a much slower pace and really experience a place. So I'm very excited about and hopeful that I'll be healthy enough to get to do those kinds of things, and looking forward to getting started on that sooner rather than later.
That is exciting. Wow. Those are great items on the bucket list. So you've got it going.
Well, I was going to say one other thing I would love to do is to, I guess it would be more like edit a book, but rather than write one. But I would really love to tell the story, not unlike the book, The Third Teacher, that came out not so long ago. But I would love to write a book that really articulates the journey that VMDO has been on relative to school design, and how that kind of arc or trajectory over. We're just a couple of years away from our 50th anniversary, and it'd be really exciting to be able to capture that story and share it with other professionals that are trying to do similar sorts of things and share what we've learned along the way. Seems like a nice way to wrap up a career.
That's really cool. All right. I can tell you got a lot you're excited about current day and that next chapter when it's time, that next season. So as we start to wrap up, two final questions. One is, if you look back on your career, any career advice you wish you'd have known earlier?
Yeah, I think that probably the two big ones that I can come up with off the top of my head is I wish I had not waited around to be asked to take on these big challenges. I think so often young professionals defer to their bosses or their peers, but they're shy to really advance their ideas. And Sam Mockbee had a quote, proceed and be bold. And that's a piece of advice I would give to young professionals. If you see a problem that needs to be solved, proceed and be bold. Don't wait to be asked. Go out and do what you know needs to be done. That oftentimes, people need to show that people need to be shown that something is possible before they can commit to it. And I wish I had done a little more of that. It might not have taken me as long as it's taken me to achieve some of the things that I wanted to achieve in my career. The second thing would be share what you learn. The stuff that we do around sustainability is just too important to be held on to as competitive advantage or intellectual property or whatever you want to call it. I think the true innovators keep on innovating. And so when you try something and you fail, share that. When you try something and you succeed, share that, but help raise others up around you, particularly if you're working in this space. It's too important to hold on to.
Wow, a lot of wisdom there. Thank you for sharing that. Lastly, let's say someone's listening to this podcast. They're getting pumped up hearing your story. how worldly you were in your youth, how you got into green buildings, added your graduate degree, and look at just how easy you make it sound to do zero net energy schools. If someone's just now jumping into this as a career, green buildings as a career, any words of encouragement for them, Rob, as we wrap up?
Well, I mean, I would certainly say, you can do it. That it may take your entire career, but you can do it. And it's a worthwhile way to spend your time and your energy making a difference, right? That's really what I wanted to do at the outset of my career. And I think many in my position, we want to make a difference through design. We want our work and our effort to matter. So it does matter. Green building matters. And it's a great place to put your time and effort. It can be very challenging and frustrating at times, but every time I look forward, I'm frustrated and impatient. And every time I look back, I say, look how far we've come. This is incredible. So I'm hopeful that, we will accelerate the pace. I think the planet needs us to, society needs us to, but I do feel that momentum happening. And I guess the last piece of advice I would give is just, practice out of love. If you do that, you'll probably make the right choices and succeed in the most important ways.
Thank you for that wisdom and that encouragement. Man, I've just loved our conversation today. We've unpacked your story. I can tell you're very fired up about everything you're doing, your team's doing. So to our listeners, hey, make sure you connect with Rob on LinkedIn. Check out VMDO, their website, and we'll put links to everything that was recommended today. So Rob, hey, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie, and have a happy holiday and best wishes for the new year.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.